My name is Nick Gale, and I'm the Department Chair of Fine Arts here at ETHS. And when I think about ETHS and I think about race, what comes to mind from my perspective as a white male is the amount of conversation that's happening around race and equity and what that looks like not only in a school but in the community and in the nation as well. This is my fourth school, and one of the things that I've really learned is how easy it is for me as a white male, and part of my white privilege is to not talk about it. And I think more often than not in the white community, it takes some pretty significant and severe action to raise the attention of race, similarly to what we're seeing in Baltimore right now with the riots. And outside of those moments, rarely is race talked about. And I think that's just a reflection of how many of us were raised. I know it's a reflection of how I was raised, and being taught to be colorblind. And so when I think of ETHS for my role, I think about the purposeful conversations that are happening, the purposeful work that is happening, not only the education that's happening for people like myself who came to ETHS to learn about the impacts of race on a student's experience here at the school, but on the flip side of that, while all these great conversations are happening, I also think about the ability to withdraw from those conversations, to opt out, so to speak, and again, contributing that to my white privilege and how I get to opt out from those things. And I think about our students who are working with staff and who are trying to navigate a building when they don't get to opt out, and every lived experience for them is directly related to race. ETHS is such a diverse school, but in many ways I think it's more diverse than we even consider. Often in the meetings I sit in and the conversations I have, I tend to group things by white students and students of color, but I think even within those two cultures, there's certainly subcultures of students that would align and identify with some aspects of one culture or another. When we think about students of color, and we think about black and brown students and Latino students, and even within the Latino community, I think there's subcultures of students that we have that would identify with some cultural traditions and aspects of their experience that might not identify with another person's experience within that Latino community. So again, I think we often talk about it in these two large generalized groups, and not often enough are we digging even deeper into each of those. And it's scary sometimes to think about how many decisions are being made and how many plans are being made for students that in some ways we're kind of unaware of. It's almost like we need a census, a more detailed census even of the school. Another subculture I think about is the GLBT students. I think that's a subculture that's has a presence in the building, but not a lot of kind of statistics around. How many students do we have that identify with that subculture? And while we have groups on campus, student groups for them to go to work with, to create a presence here in the building, we don't always think of those students when it comes to curricular decisions. So far, I've been at ETHS for just under 2 years, and I think while I haven't seen any aggressive racial discrimination in my time, I think what I've seen more often than not is that passive discrimination. And what we often think about, and what I as a white male often think about when it comes to discrimination and racism, is this very aggressive act. Could be graffiti on a wall, could be the treatment of somebody, the language we're using, very aggressive acts of nature and behavior. And I think racism has kind of shielded itself, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but I think racism is now showing up in more passive ways, structures that are in place that prevent certain students from accessing others. I think even just expectations from students, from parents. Which students have the parents that are going to advocate for them? So really trying from an institutional perspective, really trying to address some of those structures that are in place. And that's the type of discrimination that I think I see more often than not. I'm even starting to see the ability to opt out, and sometimes the desire to opt out in others. There's kind of another example of some of the discrimination that's happening. So again, while on one hand we think, oh good, these aggressive things aren't happening, in some ways that's almost more unfortunate. And again, when I go back to the Baltimore riots, while I'm certainly not going to condone violence or violent acts, it's almost like did it take that violent act to have the discussion? And sometimes I wonder here at ETHS, if we had more aggressive acts of discrimination or racism, would some of those who are opting out be more willing to have the conversation? Because again, it's easy to opt out, especially when things are more passive. So those have been my experiences at ETHS so far. I think there's a lot of people doing some really great work here. I give a lot of credit to Dr. Witherspoon, Marcus Campbell, as the leaders of our school for really continuing to have the conversation, put race on the table, even at times when it might seem unnatural or disconnected from what we're talking about. I think that's helping people.
I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think about ETHS&RACE is the idea of minority groups getting stopped in the hallways. I actually did a sociology project last semester, and we asked different students of various races, who do they think gets stopped in the hallways more? And everybody, or not everybody, but like a huge majority of people replied like blacks or Latinos. And so that was from the student perspective. And from the safety perspective, I actually spoke to James, and he said that it wasn't a racial standpoint, it was more of like a paternal or maternal instinct, seeing somebody from your race group doing wrongly, you want to help them do right. And he also spoke about how there were a lot of people in the Department of Safety here at Evanston that were from minority groups. So he thinks that it's not from a racial standpoint, it's more of like a paternal or maternal instinct. So I think that's what comes to mind most when I think about Evanston and race. I think ETHS is really diverse. I look to my friends from, say, Loyola Academy, where it's predominantly like white and Asian, and when they come to Evanston, or like when we hang out here, they see so many different things, and it's such a culture shock to them. But to me, it's so common, and I'm really happy that I got to grow up in such a diverse place and get to meet so many cool people, because you get to you get to experience a lot of different cultures and see where everybody comes from, and I think that's what makes the beauty of life, is being able to meet people from different races. And I think ETHS is really diverse in that.
Yes, I think there's a safe space at ETHS, and it's Mr. Winchester's room. He is a U.S. history teacher and sociology teacher, and he has discussions about race, and it's a pretty safe space. Good place to talk about race, because it's not discussed that much.
My name is Mr. McLaughlin. I work in the hub, and I would like to see, I was asked to answer what I would like to see change with regards to race at Evanston. I would very much like to see more discussion across racial boundaries and more participation across racial boundaries when it comes to racially themed programs and things. Too often I see programs that are geared toward African American students that are only participated in by African American students, and programs that are geared toward Latino students that are only participated in by Latino students. And I think that there's a missing voice at the table when it comes to those things, and there's a lack of understanding that arises from not participating in those things fully, and that could definitely add to the conversation.
Well, with ETHS, there is this drive-by diversity. When you see the statistics of the school and when you walk by, you see that there are many different people in the school, but when you go into the classes, it's actually really segregated. And with these classes, in these classes, you can see that some people aren't that comfortable. So when you're in classes such as AP and honors classes, especially when it's history or English, and the teacher doesn't enforce talking about race, it doesn't seem like a safe place to talk. Fortunately, I have had great teachers like Ms. Morris, Mr. Cardis, Mr. Calix, that pushed talking about race, that race is an influential part in every one of our lives and in history. And with those teachers who show that we are not in a post-racial society, those are the teachers that create an environment where it's safe to talk about these subjects and that you feel comfortable with talking about these subjects.
I witnessed a lot of racism between security, how they let certain kids walk past. Like if it's a black student, they'll call them over to get a pass. If it's a white student, they'll just let them keep walking. So I think there's a bit of some racial tension between security and the students. So yeah. I have seen this. I have experienced it. I was actually not late to school, but I was still called to get a pass 1 minute before the bell actually rang. So, and then there were these two white students who just walked right past. I think there were two sophomores, and they just told security that they don't want to get a pass, and then security let them go. So I was given a pass when I really didn't need one, and they actually needed it.